Hey guys, and welcome on board to today's session. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to get into a bit of politics today. But what I'm going to try and do is actually keep it really sort of basic and just look at the two things. I mean, it's a hugely complex thing, geopolitics, but I think it's important to understand the big picture of where things are going because it's all fine to focus on recessions and depressions and all this sort of these buzzwords and that. But actually, if we look at a bigger picture, at the end of the day, inflation, recession, depression, all those things end, okay? But what we have is on a broader scale is actually the geopolitics and the direction they're heading in. And what we're finding now is we're at the cusp of a massive change, and that massive change we haven't seen since World War II, which is 60 odd years ago. And I think the real interesting thing is how does that impact us as property investors? You might say that it's far too big and it's far too big a concept, but the reality is actually it does impact us. And so we'll look at the major players, we'll look at what's going on, and we'll look at the direction it's going to head. I think that's pretty certain that it is going to head that way unless there's a major difference of some sort, which would normally be a war or I suppose a famine or virus that affected only a certain portion. But that's unlikely. It's probably war is I guess the instrument of massive geopolitical change for the most part, and it has been for centuries and still is. And America certainly has that covered in terms of the largest army, navy, air force, military force, most technologically advanced, bar none. In fact, they've got bigger than the next five. So so it's a pretty serious and formidable stick if they need to use it. And they're very happy using it too, which is they need to keep that engine moving and But anyway, so let's get in with the usual stuff we do. Just having a look at it now. I'll be honest with you. We've changed up this slide, which I've been counting down from 30 days originally. But to be fair, what we've got to the end of the lockdown, which was yesterday. We should have been coming out according to their first 3 weeks. We're not going to. We're supposed to only reach the peak in the UK this week, okay? So what I'm suggesting is that we've probably got, originally it was the 24th of March, they said the 14th of April we'd be coming out for 3 weeks and then we'll review it. They will review it this week, so it's likely to come out because they said every 21 days they'll renew it. But I think it's likely to be extended for 3 weeks. And I think maybe they might start doing certain things and moving in certain directions in certain areas once they see the peak. And I think that'll be the real determination. But I'm saying about the 4th of May. I think, we're going to, April will be a write-off for the most part. And I think probably that's what we're likely to do. So I'm sort of gunning for the 4th of May is my prediction. That may change when they meet. They may want to open things up a lot quicker. My concern is the political will's there to open it, but the medical advice isn't. The medical advice is to really get control of this. We don't want it flaring back up, which it could do, and it is likely to do. But if we can, get over this peak now and then start to manage it, people change their ways, then that's quite good, and it's likely to change things. So, if we look at the cases, 1.925 million. I didn't track it over Easter the last 4 days. So, on Thursday it was 1.6. Yeah. So another 300,000. And as you can see by the list here, the list is getting longer of countries that have more than 10,000 cases, and pretty soon I'm only going to be tracking 20,000 cases. And when I first started, it was 100 cases, then 1,000 cases, then 10,000 cases. So not really something to be laughing about, but let's look at recovery. So 567 thousand outcomes. So 1.9 million, 567 have had our outcomes. 447,000 recovered, so still 79%. Okay, that figure probably won't change too much until we get to the very tail end of it, and then we'll have a lot more recoveries than we will the other side, which is the deaths. But 120,000 recovered over Easter, so that's good news for those 127,000 people, including obviously Boris Johnson, who's back at work, I imagine today, or possibly still resting. I'm not sure. But anyway, so that's good news. Good news, and I think we're getting there. They're talking about the peak. They're talking about, it seems to be that it hasn't been as bad as everyone thought, which is great. But that doesn't mean that we're in the woods, out of the woods yet. Cool. So let's have a look at the geopolitics. So let's have a look at the sides. So let's start off. So the first side is the US, and I think, look, you guys must know this. It's US and China. They are the two largest economies. They're the two biggest players, and they're the two most, diametrically opposed, yet philosophically the same. I mean, it's amazing. You might say that these are a democratic capitalist country and this is a communist, socialism, whatever. But the reality is the way they treat their people is very similar. And you may say that's rubbish, human rights in China, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm sorry, but as much as there is in China, there is in the US too, the way they, yes, it may not be in certain areas and, that, but the reality is the regard for life is, or disregard for life is something that's pretty ridiculous. And it's, it comes to the fore very much so in the way they've dealt with this coronavirus. I mean, it's amazing how far ahead, that the US is, in corona deaths, It's incredible. But anyway, let's not get into that. I can go on for days. But look, bottom line is the US has been the biggest since World War II. If you think about it, in World War II, they didn't have a massive drop in, destruction. So the whole of Europe was destroyed and needed to be rebuilt. That cost a lot of money. The US didn't need to do that. The US was able to provide stuff and charge. And also, through the Bretton Woods Agreement and a number of agreements like that, the establishment of the UN, World Health Organization, all these sort of international money fund or monetary fund, these sort of guys, all of this were to some degree surrogates for the US, all right? And they were able to produce favorable terms. Same with the petrodollar. Like, they have had it since World War II. They come out of that doing very well, okay? And that has really persisted. But what they've got now is massive debt. They are the world's reserve currency, but they've got low wage growth. So things are not getting better for their people, and that's a reality. For the wealthy, maybe, but not for the poor and the middle class. And growth is coming from overseas markets. Most of their people, are, they're middle class, by worldwide standards, they're actually quite wealthy, Their GDP per capita is quite good compared to, say, somewhere like Africa, or some of these underdeveloped countries, or even China, and that's where we'll see a big difference. NATO was another one. They, was built to defend against the, Soviet Union. And the World Monetary Fund was world monetary stability. It's kind of like the Reserve Bank, but the worldwide one. The World Bank was to stop poverty. Which actually has been very successful in doing a lot of these things. UN is peace and security. WHO is the World Health. So all these things were. They weren't just US initiatives, but they certainly were well-funded and well-controlled and really pushed the agenda of the US. So the other side of the things is China. And really China now is, it's the biggest GDP within a decade. So it's not yet, but it will be. It's moving towards there. They're moving more people out of poverty and up into the middle class than anywhere else in the world. Massive wealth, large army, but a decade behind the US Army. So they're not as technologically advanced. They've got a bigger army too in terms of numbers, but not as technologically advanced. Standard of living is actually increasing. But what that means, and this is something the US hasn't got, which is domestic demand that can grow. The domestic demand is always there. So they're getting incremental increases, whereas China is getting masses of millions of people, and it has, obviously billions of people, or billion plus people, who are coming out of poverty. And so that creates consumer demand. So natural growth, they don't need to look internationally for growth. However, they are the world's manufacturing belt. All that is again being questioned now because of coronavirus. In some ways, people are saying, coronavirus has caused all the issues, and, it was them China doing it, and getting it so they can take advantage. The reality is, I think, if we look in a year or 2 or 3 years' time, China will actually have potentially given away its place as the global manufacturer in places like Vietnam, Indonesia, these sort of places, these Southeast Asian places where still got cheap labour, they will have taken over. And so watch those places boom. They already are, one thing the trade, stuff did with the tariffs, it moved a lot of Chinese companies out into other countries. So, it may be surrogates for China, but China's definitely, strategically better positioned than the US. The US is burning bridges, whereas China is creating them, yeah? And I think that's the fundamental geopolitical push and theme that's going to be over the next 5-10 years. And this is not just Trump thing, Trump has certainly accelerated and it's made it more fun. And what I mean by more fun, it's made it easier to make fun of the US having Trump there because, you've got a buffoon that's totally incompetent, and, self-serving, and that's the reality of the situation. Look, you've got this, and most people don't know about this, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Yeah, watch this organization because over the next few years, it's the equivalent of NATO, if you like, which was more about security and protection, but this is more of an economic one. See, China is exerting its force not through having the biggest military and the biggest armies and navies and things like that. It's basically doing it by lending money and by spending money on infrastructure. Now, a lot of people are saying that infrastructure, what happens is when the country can't afford it, they're going to go in and take it over and they'll own it, and that's how they'll take over and exert influence. They'll exert influence anyway. I mean, this is geopolitics, and there's nothing we can do about that. China has a massive population. They've got a massive head start. The US is failing. They've got massive debt. They haven't got consumer growth. They haven't got a lot of things. So they are doing what the UK did, prior to, for the 100 years prior to World War II, and even before that, the UK had started to lose that. But anyway, these places are, China, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, far out, man. All the stans. India. So they're actually parties to the agreement. Then you've got the observers, which is Afghanistan, Belarus, Mongolia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and interestingly, Turkey. And I'll put that back up on there. And the amazing thing of this is you've got a place like Turkey, which actually was applying to become part of the EU, which is very US-centric. All of a sudden have said, well, maybe what we'll do is we'll join with the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So that's a massive coup for them. Is it a right one? Well, actually, to be fair, I think it probably is, for them, because let's face it, the US isn't doing them any real favours, I don't think. EU's not doing them any real favours. But look, the other side is, and this is China's response, and this is not about coronavirus. This is geopolitics. This is bigger than coronavirus. All coronavirus is doing is making it happen quicker and making it more obvious. So the first one on the left-hand side here, with member states to do it, that's the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you can see the coverage of that. Now, interestingly, if we look at this, then we have a look at the Belt and Road. So this is the SCO. Then you've got the Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative is the old Silk Road. Effectively what they're doing is shipping lanes and ports and roads and infrastructure, electricity lines, train lines, all through. Now you can see at the top, this was the initial proposal, with green being the China and this being the, if you like, the Mongolia, Russia, basin. And then what you've got is underneath that, you've got the sort of Asian area. So this is the economic powerhouse. Now, you'll notice that missing from that is North America, South America. But then when we put North America, South America in, this is how it currently looks. Now, if you look, the amazing thing is the number of people that are jumping on board with China and not the US. So North America is not involved in this. You've got then, if you look South America, the Chiles and the, like a lot of these sort of places along the western coast of South America. But then amazingly, you've got places like New Zealand, which you wouldn't have expected. And in fact, that was a bit of a shock to most people. But what we're finding is a lot of countries are choosing and effectively moving away from the US leadership. They're not accepting it anymore. The most powerful person in the world is no longer the Trump. I mean, you might say yes, he is, and a lot of people still say that, but very quickly it's moving across to China, China, India, and effectively those sort of places where very soon it's going to be less about the US and its consumers, because consumers have no money. They're racked with debt. And so eventually that will slow things down. They're not spending as much. If they're not spending enough, they're not consuming as much. So the axis is moving from the United States to China. And I think one of the interesting things is, my kids, I'm teaching them Chinese, I'm not gearing them up to go to universities in America. I mean, maybe universities in the UK, but I want them to learn Chinese. And it may well be that they end up going to a Chinese university or, an Indian university even, because let's face it, there is a lot more happening over there in terms of, fast growth and, change and a lot of these, new things coming on. So potentially that could be geopolitically where my kids are at. Now, my kids are young, so we're talking, 15 years away, but 15 years, it's a long time. Now, I will say this. I'm not saying that America's going to fall over anytime soon, okay? That's not going to happen. America is still going to be a powerhouse for many years to come, decades, okay? But it's going to be a slow, gradual decline, exactly the same way as the empire, the British Empire did when it declined. It took many years, yeah? And to a large degree, we were in the number one GDP in the world at the time, we ruled the world. And then what happened over time, it slowly decreased and we're number 5 now, the 5th biggest economy. We're still the 5th biggest economy. That's huge. So America's not going anywhere. It'll go to 2nd or 3rd, depending on how India does and things like that. But, it will be probably in the next decade or so. It could change. As I said, wars change things geopolitically, but it would be because you've got China and Russia and Iran and this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it's very hard for America now to go and invade a place like that. It can go after an Iran because it's probably not big enough to, really threaten. But when it goes after China, not only economically can it hurt America very quickly, but yeah, so this is where it's happening. So, okay, so I'll show you one more slide. So this is actually, if you have a look at this is the response to the coronavirus, all right? America, they try to buy exclusive access to vaccine for Americans, yeah? Make America great again. That's been their attitude. It's all about them, yeah? Screw the world, we're America, yeah? Look at China's response. They've offered support to over 80 countries, yeah? South Korea, Italy, Hungary, Iran, Malaysia, Germany, Serbia, Spain, France, Philippines, and the list continues to grow, sending, tons and tons of PPE, masks, all this sort of stuff. That is what's going to start to happen. That's the coronavirus diplomacy that they're playing at, and that actually will win hearts and minds. This is where America has failed with this. They failed in Afghanistan, they failed in Iran, Iraq. They've really failed everywhere they've done it because there's no authenticity behind it. Now, is China authentic in what they're doing? Look, there's no doubt about it. This is geopolitics. So you don't offer something without expecting something in return. And right now, what China wants in return is it wants good publicity from those countries. It wants the photos. It wants the social media. Not necessarily for the rest of the world, but internally, so that its people think how great Chinese are and how they're helping out the world. Fantastic. You know what? It's no different than anyone else did. Yeah. We may judge it differently, but the reality is that is the game of geopolitics. Now, what does this mean to property investors? Because I think this is, let's get down to it. Right now, what it means is this. Yeah. We have been, as the UK and Australia and Canada and many, many westernized countries have been heading the direction of the US. But what you're going to start to see now is we're now going to start to be torn between the two. On some issues will be Chinese, some issues will be American. And actually more and more what's going to happen, I think, where the pendulum is going to be if we're British, we're British. If we're Australian, we're Australian. And those sort of things. And I think for us, and as an individual investor, this doesn't mean a lot, okay? What it does mean is that more and more you are going to have to make sure that you're on the side of having money, having wealth, having assets, than not having these. If one thing's for sure in America, look at the people who can get a test. They're the people with money. Look who the people who can get a test. They're people with power. And that has always been. That is not going to change. Yeah. And what does wealth and power mean? That means having assets, having cash flow, and having those sort of things. And so really, if nothing else, get that sorted out. I mean, and the unfortunate thing is, with this much money getting spent right now to prop up economies all around the world, what that means is the value of cash is probably going to drop. And all that means is if you got lots of cash, it's probably going to be worth less than it was yesterday, and even less than it was worth a month ago. And so things like that, you've got to really consider, in your broad thing. But look, geopolitics, does it have a play an impact in your day-to-day life? No, but it's good to know where things are heading. Because let's face it, if you're investing in the US right now, for property investment, there might be cheap and they're not going away in a hurry. But, you've got to really understand two things. It's all about make America great again. In other words, they're thinking about themselves, not about you. So if you're American, fine. If you're not, then, you've got to really consider that. And the second thing is, they're a declining economy over a long period of time, whereas you might find there's other economies like, Vietnam and Indonesia, they're two that I'm sort of looking at right now, that actually are, growing economies. But there's always opportunities in, even Japan, who has had deflation for so long, is now starting to come out and look good. Abenomics, has been working. So yeah. So that's yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry. My phone just started pressing play. I don't know how, but anyway, good fun. So guys, that's pretty much me done for today. And look, any questions you've got, type them into the thing. Make sure you remember to subscribe. I'm doing these every day now. I'm on different subjects. And I really think right now for me things are looking quite good. Okay, from an overall perspective, we're starting to talk about coming out of where we've been in terms of lockdowns, things like that. Europe's starting to open up. It's starting. So we're 2 or 3 weeks away from that happening and getting back to some level of new norm, and so that's good news. So now is the time to really start planning and looking at what you're going to come and how your business is going to come out, how your career is going to restart, how your position, your role, your job is going to, but also how your finances, how you're going to survive over the next 3 weeks, 3 months in the new norm. All right, guys, have a fantastic day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and remember, stay inside still. But hopefully for only another couple of weeks. All right, guys, chat later. See you. Bye.